Yo, what up? Welcome to another episode of the Oakland Warriors podcast. I'm Patrick, and I am joined by my old friend, Aram in Toronto. What's up, Aram?
Oh, just NBA champions. Man, I'm super happy. This has been an amazing season. What a great postseason run. I'm up here in Toronto celebrating in my mind, reading everything, just really trying to soak it in. The champagne is still soaking in. The metaphor.
Yeah, champagne?
No. The champagne vibes is soaking in to my soul. This was an amazing postseason, and it's stressful because it's like 2 months long, a little over 2 months long.
Yeah. Actually, April. Yeah, I mean it's ended on June 16th, so almost 2.5 months.
It's
Absolutely
long. It's a slog. So first off, I'm curious, how do you watch these games? Because I don't have other Warriors fans to watch them with here. I don't know if I want to per se. So I sit in my basement and have the TV on, and these games are late. So I'm up late yelling at the TV, and not only yelling, and I'm just bringing this up because my wife has brought it up to me. She's like, you only yell when they do badly. So I'm like yelling and swearing. And, it's one of those things where when you're in a place where everybody's watching these games, there's a kind of like communal buzz, and other people in the neighborhood are watching it. But I am always like, do my neighbors think something's going wrong? You know what I mean? Because they're not wrapped up in it. Right. Yeah, I'm a little bit like, oh. And then I was telling you on the chat, I was like, okay, yelling's okay. I got to take out some of the swearing though. So I cut down on that for game 6. And I felt like that was an accomplishment for me as well. So, but anyway, I just curious, how do you watch these games?
Well, I mean, I watch them taking notes on my phone or on my computer, depending on like what I feel like typing on. And I watch these games regular season by myself, usually, girlfriend's here. Sometimes she tunes in, sometimes not. During the playoffs though, especially the finals, I'll be honest, hopefully she can't hear me, but like, she was yelling more than I was during the
nice.
finals. And I was like, I kept like looking at her, and I was like, I'm trying to stay calm, cause like, know how I can get or how we can get, and like, not, just try to stay solid. And she was like, oh, come on. And like hitting the couch and stuff like that. And lots of swearing by me in general, and especially in the finals. And it was fun. It was very cool to like, have her be as invested as I am. Yeah. Because usually during the regular season, it's like, there's another game tonight, huh?
Yeah. And what's the big, well, don't get worked up about this. Yeah.
Usually I take a ton of notes, and it's funny though too, right? Because a lot of my notes are worthless by the end of the game, because I take a lot of notes in the first quarter, right? And unless they just tank from the first quarter on, it's like usually the same stuff. The team goes on a run. They need to play a little bit harder, but by the end, the story is totally different. And game 6, like I'd written all these notes about the first and second quarters pretty much. And for the most part, it was like out the door because, they won. So it was more about the feeling of winning than like really truly breaking down the game. But it was funny because Paula's sister was in town, her sister Patrice, and we were all watching it together. And I'm like, I have a very specific way of watching, right? Because I rewind plays because I want to see other elements of the plays. And when it's like a big shot from like Steph, like a dagger, or just something like Draymond hitting 2 threes, or Steph hitting that long distance one and doing the ring, pointing at the ring thing. Like I'll rewind that to watch like the fans like do this, their hands on their head, or to see like the players like dip their heads down, or even what's his name, Derek White. he could not hide his like feeling every time Steph hit a massive shot. Like his
Yeah.
shoulders would slump and he'd put his head down. And it's like, I mean, he kind of looked like Austin Rivers out there. Because if you ever see Austin Rivers when Steph hits a three on him, he's just like throws his hands up, like what am I supposed to do? You know, like what the hell?
Yeah.
So you know, it's fun, but it's like it's especially during the playoffs and the finals, it's like so intense because you're just watching so closely, and then you're also like taking notes, and then you know, I'm thankful that I get a break from that. You know, like
Yeah.
right now as we're recording, it would be Game 7. It would be like third quarter of Game 7.
Whew. Oh,
And
I'm so glad.
my blood pressure is just normal now, so
Yeah.
that's not happening right now. So
No, 2 months of anxiety was not good for our blood pressure. Yeah, see, you know, I mean, I was asking this too because I have been in Toronto for over 15 years now, and I missed
the home
all
of
the
Andrew
Giants
Wiggins.
He went to high school just down the road, but I've been here for so long, and I've missed all the championships. I haven't been home, right? And
Yeah.
and I miss that kind of communal fanaticism, you know, where it's like, yeah, it's okay to be jumping up and down and yelling, and it's expected, right?
Yeah.
I even in 2019, I had an opportunity. I was in the Bay Area for work, and it was the game where Steph scored 0 points in the first half against Houston, and then scored 33 in the second half. And I had an opportunity. I had a work thing, but I totally had an opportunity to skip out on that and just like go to a bar and watch it with other Warriors fans for the first time in this whole run. And I was like, you know what? I should go to the work thing. And I'm so mad. I'm so mad that I did that, because like I've never watched any of these championship runs with anybody else who cares.
Oh man, so, that's the responsible Aram I know.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, so thank you for, at the end of this run, it's been awesome to be able to come on here periodically and talk about it, because it's a chance to feel that communal fanaticism again. So I know this is the beginning of the podcast, so it's kind of weird that that's sounds like the end, but in terms of the game, and with a few days away from the aftermath of it, some kind of like larger thoughts that I've been thinking of is that, how a lot of the time we complain about Kerr and his defensive leanings.
That's more you. I'd say it's about 80-20.
You sure? Because it's just like sometimes they get in those funks where they can't score, and you're just like what's going on? But Kerr was right. Defense really wins championships. And we heard all about the Celtics defense. We were even, a little bit spooked. The Warriors were spooked by Robert Williams. But one thing that's been was so interesting about this finals is the way we watch defense. I think if you were like a basketball coach or high level player, then you understand how defense works. But for a fan like myself, like I realize I don't understand how to watch defense, and I think partially the media and broadcast could do a better job of explaining that. Like, how is something like the Warriors defense working, right? And but part of me feels like they don't know either, because the way that we think about defense is the Celtics defense, like long switchy wings and a big shot blocker making spectacular blocks. You look at the Warriors personnel, they don't seem like, we know Draymond's reputation as a defender, but we don't actually understand, in a broad sense, we don't understand what he does that makes him so good. And it's like helping, it's communication, it's like hedging, it's stunting, like all of these things that I'm sort of starting to learn. Because their personnel outside of like, GP2, like great individual defender, Draymond, great individual defender and help defender. But like, they have a bunch of kind of like average sized dudes who try really hard, but their schemes, and I think their schemes really work. They get coached up. They know how to focus on an opponent, because it did really feel like they figured some things out about how to lock up the Celtics, and they played a little bit of a little bit of cat and mouse with them, right? In those first few
Mhm.
games, they had to figure it out. And, when Clay said it feels like 2015 in terms of like, oh, we kind of have a sense of what, like we're trying to figure it out and we figured it out. And
Mhm.
Andre Iguodala said something similar like that. And at the time I was like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with you saying that, but they were right,
Yeah.
and then they took the rest of the series, right?
Mhm.
So so I just wanted to like appreciate the defense, and I still don't quite understand it, and I'd like to go back and see
Yeah.
and have hopefully have a better understanding of what the things that they do, how can they be effective. And I think it also ended up being a good matchup in terms of, yeah, these wings are great, but you can turn them over really well, take away things that they like to do, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like with defense, like there's some things that a lot of people don't really look at that closely because when you're a fan, you're just watching the offense, right? And you just the
Mm-hmm.
defender and like what happens, and but it's like crazy because I think that the Warriors were so good, and obviously people got better in terms of individual defense. I mean, Clay got much better. It seems like the Warriors were just doing a lot of variety and not just
Mm-hmm.
like going from man to zone, but like you said, all those like key words, and they would do stuff that would confuse the Celtics
Yeah.
when would help come and everything, right? Because when you watch it and you watch the Celtics on offense, it's like you're not really paying attention so much about like, the help defender chose not to come, and then the next play he does, right? It's like those are things
Yeah.
that you really do have to kind of go back if you're not looking for them in the moment, go back and look at because I think confusing the offense was a big part of it, the Celtics offense, and especially frustrating guys like Tatum and Marcus Smart.
I mean, this is a point that I think Danny LaRue and Marcus Thompson had on Danny LaRue's podcast about like
Mm-hmm.
how people have talked about like, oh, Brown and Tatum, they just missed shots, or they didn't, Celtics offense just missed shots, or they didn't
Mm-hmm.
do what they were supposed. It's like, well, there's a reason why they didn't do it, right? And
Yep.
it's the defensive force, and just because you don't have, like, we don't, we look at Robert Williams and kind of lust after a shot blocking presence. We're like, oh, imagine James Wiseman on their team. And like, yes, let's imagine that because that's coming soon. But
Yeah.
it's also like, wow, it's amazing what they are doing even without that. But we just don't even understand that. That's not part of our like basketball upbringing, I think, unless you're super, super deep into it. Yeah. I mean, but the other thing too is like when you think about the previous series where they have gone down 2-1, the first Memphis series back in the day, the Cavaliers series that same year, this
Mm-hmm.
this ability to figure an opponent out is really,
Mm-hmm.
really cool.
Yeah.
And they figure it out defensively. And this is not to throw shade at Tatum and Brown, but like the time that the Warriors got beat when they were whole was like by some all-time great performances, like
Mm-hmm.
like literally all-time great performances in 2016.
Yeah.
And we said it in our finals preview. It's like, you said we have the best player in this series, and by the
Mm-hmm.
end that was like levels above who
Yeah.
their
No doubt.
best player was, and
Mm-hmm.
to the point where their two best players were kind of like at the same level, but kind of in a middling way, and just our dude was just levels above.
Yeah. I mean, our dude was uh, all-time great, Hall of Fame level, and those other dudes were like, okay, all stars.
Yeah, yeah,
That's pretty much it. Young all stars. Yeah, I mean, I have some of those. I guess I have all the games on DVR somehow, but I do want to kind of look back at some of those when I've had some time away and just see what they were doing because like
yeah,
I'll admit like I watch defense when I watch a game, but I don't like break it down like that deeply because if all of a sudden people are throwing like different looks like zone man, that's easy to tell. Boxing one, that's easy to tell. But when they're doing stuff like I said before, the help is not going to come because what why? Like those are the things, like when do they choose to help and when do they choose to just like leave it as is and try to mess with the Celtics. But I texted you during the finals. I was like, man, it's funny how every team just thinks they lose because of mistakes they made,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes
Yeah.
that's true, but it's not just a one-way street. The Celtics in that final game were unable to get any good shots off because of what the Warriors were doing, right? If the Warriors were not doing any of that, Tatum would have a bunch of open shots. He wouldn't
Yep.
have had like, Wiggins on him and then Draymond on him and then Looney popping out, stuff like that.
Yeah.
He wouldn't
Yeah.
be in the corner scared to shoot. I guess with the crowd saying shoot it and then step out of bounds, I mean, that is next level shook, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Props to the Warriors,
Yeah. I mean, the defense has that ability to, to just get in a team's head. I mean, that certainly was the case with Robert Williams, and credit to the Warriors for to keep trying. And that dude was just blocking everything. But the Warriors defense was getting in the Celtics head too, by the end. And there was in the fourth quarter, there was Wiggins had this amazing sequence where Tatum went across the lane, Wiggins like packed him, just blocked it,
mm-hmm.
back on another run. I think Wiggins hit a three. Just like maybe a minute later, Tatum had a split second to get a three and shoot a three in the corner. But Wiggins just made this amazing closeout, and but it was probably still enough to get a shot off. But he was spooked, this rotation and the closeout was great. Just to change gears a little bit in terms of like Wiggins, but also like, the what's been really cool about this finals run, this playoff run, is the ability to shift the narrative, the narrative, quote unquote, that we refer to often, which is out there. Obviously the Steph in the finals MVP was ridiculous from the start, but that's been put to bed. But I really love this Wiggins change of narrative and how, like, just to see a guy maligned by us sometimes, really put it together at the exact right time. And he got better and better and better as this run went on, better in terms of his contributions, like, the numbers, maybe shooting numbers, maybe like, one of the games he was like over 6 on threes or something like that, but he still played amazing defense, chipped in points when he needed to, got rebounds. I just love, and like you said, local boy, does well, went to high school just down the road from my house. And it's just really awesome to see a person's perception publicly, like it got changed
on the biggest stage too, right? It's like, wow, it's impressive to me because it's like, and I've talked to you about this before the playoffs started, when Poole was playing well towards the end of the regular season, it was, how much are you going to pay Poole? And it was like, well, I guess you'll have to, trade Wiggins when he's coming off the books, and then Moody, Kuminga will step up and fill his role. But now to play this well, I mean, he's 27. So the hope is that he's, in his prime, and then he's going to keep ascending. I guess the fear, because of all the Minnesota stuff, is like, oh, well, it was the stage and then like the consistency in the regular season. But I'm betting on Wiggins, to be honest, because of the environment, because of what he's able to do, because of he had a different coach, I think, almost every year when he was in Minnesota, right? And almost as many GMs.
And he played in one playoff series before this year, right? Like, 5-game series. So he probably doesn't even know he was this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guarantee you that like the core vets, right? The Hall of Fame dudes, that they're like, you're keeping him. You know what I mean? You have a wing in his prime who won us a championship as the second best player in the playoffs for us overall. And if you're going to talk about the vets wanting to like have an older player not rely on like 19, 20-year-olds, then he's the guy, right? You're gonna keep him, and so
Yep.
the financials of it, obviously, it's a huge payroll, but right now, like that's not my problem. That's neither here nor there. If they want to win titles, Steph, Clay, Draymond, they're gonna want to keep him around because they
Yeah.
know that he's a 16 game player at this
Yep.
point.
Yep.
So that's impressive.
Yeah, I also want to kind of call back to over the past season. You've mentioned the Wiggins smile. Whenever it happened in a game, and it was
And
always a good thing.
the fifth pump too.
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that this is also kind of like unlocked him a little bit. He can be himself a little bit more because, and then he's such a he seems like a quiet dude, right? At least publicly. But just scrolling on feeds and whatnot and seeing some of the celebrations. I don't know if you saw that clip of him
sure.
dancing.
Yeah.
That was awesome. It was awesome to see him cut loose a little bit like that. I also just want to make a quick note that I think it was before last season, when Wiggins had only played a little bit. We got Kelly Oubre. I think that I compared Wiggins and Oubre as these like big wings to Tatum and Brown. I definitely said like the poor man's version of that. But now, hey, 1 out of 2 in relatively close to these kind of like high level wings. I'll take that. I'll take that odds. I was wrong about the other one, but I remember that. That was pretty funny,
especially with Wiggins, being more consistent and in a few of the games outplaying both those dudes. Kelly Oubre is somebody I joked about when Kenny Atkinson decided not to take the Charlotte job. I was like, Steve Kerr probably was like, "You don't want to coach Oubre."
In terms of people whose narratives changed, I think I feel like I haven't seen too much about this person, but I know the narrative has changed in my mind, and that's Rick Celebrini.
Sure, yeah.
We loved Chelsea Lane. She moved on to Atlanta, got a promotion, which is awesome. And then this guy comes in and, was recommended by Steve Nash. And then all of these injuries happen. And I think, in the 2019 playoffs, is like, wait, when is KD coming back? Like, when is KD coming back? So there was like this kind of weird lack of communication, and who knows what that was all about. But he's the lead of the medical staff and training staff. And so, it's easy as a fan to be like, what's going on? Chelsea would never do this, like as if we know what she's like. But, and then these last 2 years were just kind of like full of like freak injuries and whatnot. But the way that this older team looked fresher, and, sure, part of it is that they didn't go through consecutive 7-game series. That's huge. But it's also cumulative too, right? Like, the fact that they know these guys are older, we need to watch their minutes, load manage them. And then on the other side, like, how many minutes did Tatum play this year? It was something like astronomical, and not just in the playoffs, but throughout the regular season. Yeah. And, sure, that's a choice, and he's young, and I'm sure he said he wants all the minutes he can get, but he definitely wore down. And like the Warriors looked way fresher in the end.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's got to be part of like the management of their bodies and their playing time and all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a while I've had like in my spreadsheet, I've had in praise of Rick Celebrini as a topic. And a lot of it was because the KD thing, and then Clay, obviously it's not his fault, Clay tore his ACL, but it just looked bad, right? The optics of like all of a sudden these two guys go down. The KD thing, he was part of that, but who knows where the blame really lies. But then it was like, and then Steph got hurt with a broken hand, but that wasn't his fault either. Yeah. And then the Clay Achilles, right? So I think the appreciation is that they got him because he had extended Steve Nash's career for so long, and it's worked for Steph. Granted, Steph had basically a year off his legs with a broken hand, but Rick Celebrini has brought all these guys back. They were fresh because I mean, it's great that Steph technically had a month off before the playoffs, and then
Yeah.
Draymond had 3 months off, and he brought them back well. So
Yep.
I 100% appreciate that. I don't know what happened to Andre Iguodala.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe
Maybe, there's
beyond,
only yeah, beyond repair. There's only a certain
yeah,
point.
or he's
Yeah.
beyond Celebrini's like age bracket of
Yeah, no sorcery can undo that. So, I mean, Clay did shout out Rick Celebrini in the
oh
post
yeah.
game. So that was kind of like, oh yeah, you know what? Should appreciate that. I know that I've said be like Chelsea would never.
I mean, Clay's durability and the amount of minutes he was playing.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's more nights off in the playoffs, but like in the Western Conference Finals, it was one day off between games,
Mm-hmm.
and he was playing 40, 44
Yeah.
minutes sometimes.
Yeah.
So like whatever he did there, he did right, and like hopefully whatever he's done to help Steph, he can help with Draymond, Clay, and whomever else is up there. You know what I mean? I do want to say something about Steph's legacy that when you brought it up, it's like now, of course, he has the same number of titles as LeBron, has a better record than LeBron. I mean, Andre, Clay, and Draymond all have the same number of rings as LeBron too, and it's crazy to me because like just following this team so closely, like every game for 2 years, now just seeing like all the chatter about how it's indisputable his greatness, people moving him in to the top 10. Andre Iguodala is saying that he's the best point guard of all time when he used to say Magic Johnson was number one, Steph was two. I mean, obviously the stuff plays out over the years and stuff, but it's fascinating because like, finally we all know there will always be trolls, haters and stuff who throw an asterisk on something, but no one was injured. Like sure, some people were dinged up, but on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But no one was injured. He was the best player by far on his team and in the series. And he showed up every single time. And even in the game where he didn't shoot well, he definitely affected the game.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now it's like, oh, now we can get more potentially, right? It's like once the team wins, it's like, oh, this team is automatically the favorite. And I mean, we could talk about this later, but it's like we saw that coming from a mile away before, you know what I mean? But we'll talk about that one maybe next episode.
Yeah.
Is there going to be like how were people in Toronto or in your neighborhood, like down the street from Wiggins High School? Like, did you hear any chatter on the news or like locally at the grocery store or whatever?
No,
or wherever people congregate?
I mean, well, I would say some people have brought him up since like this weekend. Yeah, I've talked about Wiggins a little bit, like the basketball fans who are people who are into it, but the general person is not talking about him. Well, a kid on my softball team went to high school, like I think maybe overlapped with him for like a year, but he didn't know him or anything like that. But you mentioned some of the injuries that happened throughout the year. I mean, and it made this quite unexpected, and I think Kerr spoke to that, and I was thinking about how I mean it is wild, and Draymond pointed this out that like the three of them had only played 11 minutes together, but that once they were all whole when the playoffs started, he knew that they had a chance, and that he believed that they really could win it at that point. I was thinking about the kind of irony of that Steph, could go on this run, and he, obviously he worked hard to get back so he could start the playoffs, but he missed all those games to end the season because Marcus Smart rolled up on him, right? And isn't it just like ironic that it was the Celtics that happened against, right? And part of me is like, do they still win if Steph plays all the games down the stretch and he's a little bit more tired and all those kinds of things? And I mean, but it was just like this kind of unintentional load management where he was out with an injury and got a chance to kind of recuperate a little bit. And so, I mean, they had some luck. You always have to have that on top of all your skill and all those kinds of things. And hey, at the time, it seemed like bad luck that they were all getting hurt, right? So let's not turn it into they had good luck, even though that's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, like we've talked about, health is always the issue when it comes to the NBA playoffs and especially the finals. I mean, look at Chris Middleton and look at like everybody from last year's playoffs, right? It feels like a bunch of people were hurt, which, people debate like, oh, the Suns getting to the finals type stuff. But yeah, I mean, like, it's one of those things where, I mean, when we did our finals, our playoff preview, it was like, we didn't know, right? That period he was out, Steph was out, also allowed Jordan Poole to get his groove back to like an immense degree. And I think that was important. So it's like bad luck, but they were able to they were able to take the hand they were dealt and do something with it. And the idea that when Steph came back, or when his results were like, it's not that bad, he'll be back in a few weeks, then it was like, great, beginning the playoffs. And we had talked about like, hey, I hope this Denver series goes like 6, or, because that'll give them more time to kind of like get used to each other and kind of find a rhythm. And I think that was really important. And it definitely was a kind of load management. Obviously, like his legs were saved a little bit more because he couldn't really do anything with a busted foot. So, he was able to just take a mental break as well. And obviously, like I said, Draymond did too. And, yeah, I mean, it was fortunate because like when all that happened, it was like, I mean, we talked about this from the outset. It was like, be healthy by the beginning of the playoffs. And then when Steph got hurt, it was like, oh man. But then it was like, oh, he's going to be healthy by the beginning of the playoffs.
Yeah.
But there's still question marks because Steph had his worst shooting year since like his first or second year, right? And he'd had some bad shooting games. So like we didn't know what we would get, to be honest. And then he turns in like this performance. He wasn't like perfect throughout the playoffs, but to get to the finals, I mean, that's what everybody will remember, right? Like, yeah, he was amazing. And, I think like, again, it's just being fortunate to have everybody be healthy enough by the beginning. I mean, minus Andre and Wiseman, but healthy enough for playoffs. I mean, look at Suns and Chris Paul, right? He hurt his hand. He was playing pretty much every game. So he was supposed to have gotten some rest, but then, I mean, he's at his age, I guess he still fell off a cliff against the Mavericks,
Your point about just making the most of these setbacks is so key. I mean, these things only connect, in hindsight, and can be turned into positives, right? Like they certainly weren't at the time, right? Obviously they try to make the most of it, and that's all you can do in the moment, right? And so, so none of this was like given by any stretch of the imagination.
All right, well, that ends part 1 of our season debriefing. Stay tuned for episode 2 with me and Aram in Toronto coming up tomorrow. This has been another episode of the Oakland Warriors podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Patrick Epino or at Oakland Warriors. Check us out at oaklandwarriors.com, and be sure to check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Oakland Warriors. Also check us out at oaklandwarriors.com, and be sure to tell your fellow Warrior fan friends to tune in and listen to the Oakland Warriors podcast. It's produced by National Film Society and is a part of the Basketball Podcast Network. And if you're so inclined, please do leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify, and leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts. That would be hugely helpful. Thanks for listening. That's it.